President Yanukovych now.
Is in this press conference. If you don't mind, we will organize our conference in the following way. Mr. Yanukovych will first like to tell you a few words, addressing them to you and the whole world, and then we will have the question time. If you agree with this, you have the floor, Mr. Yanukovych, please.
Thank you. Distinguished viewers, journalists, it's high time for me to announce my decision to fight for the future of Ukraine against those who use fear and terror to take the power. And I've decided to go public about it. No one has deposed me. I was forced to leave Ukraine because of the threat to my life and the life of my relatives. As you know, the power in Ukraine was seized by nationalist, pro-fascist youth mobs who represent a minority of the Ukrainian population. How do I see the solution out of the crisis? We need to fulfill what was laid down by the crisis settlement agreement between the President of Ukraine and opposition leaders, in the presence of the foreign ministers of France, Germany, and Poland, as well as a representative of the Russian Federation. We need to embark on a constitutional reform and finish it by September 2014. The reform needs to balance out all of the branches of power, the authorities of the President, the Parliament. Then we need to hold presidential election in December of 2014, and then to adopt a new constitution. Of course, it's very important to conduct an unbiased investigation of the acts of violence, of course, given the monitoring of the European authorities. And all of the arms and weapons need to be handed over to the police. All of the buildings and streets and squares need to be deblocked and barricades need to be removed. All of the armed gunmen need to leave the streets. We need to ensure normal life for the citizens of Ukraine, including in Kiev and other regions of the country. We need to take into account the interests of all the regions of Ukraine. It will be very difficult to get out of this difficult situation. The turbulent time that we faced and the casualties are the consequences of the political crisis that Ukraine faced. This is the result of the irresponsible policy of the West, which connived at the Maidan opposition forces. But Ukraine is a strong country and we will prevail. We will get out of this crisis. And I also urge to hold a Ukrainian referendum. As for the issues that will be put on that referendum for vote, we need to discuss these issues with the participation of the broad spectrum of the civil society. And of course, they have to reflect the relevant problems that the country is facing, and also in terms of the state and state order. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Yanukovych. I'd like to hear out some questions. The first question is to be asked by my Interfax colleague. You're welcome to ask a question. Oh, the mic isn't working. Please introduce yourself. The mic isn't working. My name is Mikhail Prokhorov from the Interfax agency. From the ITARTAS agency, excuse me. Please just talk as loudly as you can. Mikhail Petrov, ITARTAS agency. Yesterday you said that the agreement concluded in February, the 21st, was not fulfilled. And my second question is that the judges of the Constitutional Court have been deposed in Ukraine. The Russian Constitutional Court has already provided some feedback on that. How could you comment on that? Thank you.
Thank you. I got the question. The agreement that was supposed to give a solution to the crisis had to be completed by both sides. And I believe that the international intermediaries were reliable. I believed in the bona fide character of their mediation. This agreement was controversial, but despite that I signed it, and the leaders of the opposition signed it too. The ministers of foreign affairs of 3 states also signed it. It was a critical decision at that point. According to it, the opposition and the radical elements that were present at the Maidan and in other regions, they had to hand over their weapons to de-block the areas they seized, but that was not enforced. And as a result, Kiev was flooded with gunmen that started pogroms. They started to destroy houses, cultural facilities and churches, and innocent civilians suffered. People were robbed and beaten up in the streets, and that is still happening. That is why that agreement gave a certain hope, but what ensued later is hard to describe. This is lawlessness, terror, complete chaos, and lack of power. So these are unprecedented decisions that were taken by the parliament through force. Some of the MPs were subject to physical violence. They cast stones at them. They were intimidated, and they were taken to Maidan Square, where they took an oath of loyalty by force. This is, of course, cannot be called the job of the parliament. This is the job that was done by Maidan opposition forces. Suppressed by the gunmen at Maidan and the Siloviki, the parliament did take those decisions. And the government, which they called the Cabinet of Victory. So, is this the victory over the Ukrainian people, I'm asking you? It should have been a government of national unity. That's what we were discussing back then. So today, it is difficult to find the proper words to describe how the power is being formed today and who's there in the power. The names which became known across the world, Yarash, Porubi and Takhnibok, these are the people who promote violence. They are well known beyond Ukraine, they're well known around the world. And in Israel, they incite fear. And I believe that the Ukrainian parliament is not legitimate, and I still maintain that the settlement, which was not fulfilled, given the condition that it will be fulfilled, it could have calmed down the situation to a certain extent and would launch the legal process of resolving the political crisis in Ukraine. That was a way out of the dead end, and the radicals have forced us into this dead end.
The second part of the question about the judges.
This is an unprecedented move. Not just for Ukraine, but for any country of the world. When a constitutional court is destroyed and the statehood itself is destroyed, we should not allow this to happen.
I don't know if the mic is going to work. I'm going to give the floor to Andrei Kolesnikov, who has a loud voice. Give him the mic. Kommersant. Mr. Yanukovych, do you feel ashamed for something?
Ashamed. Furthermore, I would like to offer my apologies, first and foremost, to the veterans, to the Ukrainian people, for what happened in Ukraine, for the fact that I didn't have enough strength to maintain stability and to allow for the mess to happen.
On the 20th, please introduce yourself. Anton Vernitsky, Channel 1. On the 21st of February, you signed an agreement with the opposition and you made concessions to the opposition. This agreement was brokered by the EU. And then suddenly you fled the country. Could you please explain in detail why you fled the country? My second question is, why didn't you speak directly to your people straight away? And my third question is, why didn't you ask the EU for help? Okay, Anton, thanks for the questions, but please keep to one question if possible.
Well, first of all, I didn't flee anywhere. I went from Kiev to the city of Kharkov. And during that trip, when I was still in Kiev, I was exposed to gunfire from automatic weapons. And the car that escorted me was subject to gunfire from all the sides. And I didn't leave alone. We didn't flee. We were supposed to meet with some of the activists in the city of Kharkov. The activists are supporters from the Party of Regions, and there was a forum that was supposed to take place in the city of Kharkov, a conference. We arrived there late at night because we had to do that. When we arrived in the city of Kharkov, from the very morning of the February the 22nd, from early morning, the security service got the information that radical elements, radical groups started arriving in Kharkov. It was not about fear. I didn't have any fear. I needed to comply with the safety conditions. I had to maintain these safety conditions. And it's not my job to set security rules. I took the decision. And the Speaker of the Ukrainian Parliament, Mr. Rybak, and the head of the Executive Office, Mr. Kluyev, were with me, and I asked them to fly to the city of Donetsk, and we had a plane ready, and so that they gather the supporters in the city of Donetsk and to tell those activists everything what had been happening in Kiev. And I decided to take a trip to the city of Lugansk. We took 2 helicopters, and first the air control dispatchers and then the military air control dispatchers warned us that we needed to change the direction. So they said that it looked like we were heading towards Russia and that they would signal fighters to ground us. And of course, the pilots of those helicopters, they are law-abiding people, they turned back and they decided to land in the city of Donetsk. So here is the explanation of the situation. So this is how I started to move around Ukraine. I took the car and we went to Crimea eventually. We arrived in Crimea late at night. The intentions that I had were ruined by the new threats. I received calls from the members of my family. They said that even the youngest grandchild was put on a blacklist. My elder son went to the kindergarten, went to the preschool facility. He took him away, and he said, I cannot risk the lives of my family. So that was what the situation was like.
Okay, keep your cool. I would like someone from the benches to speak now. Yeah, the gentleman in the black jacket, please. Mr. Yanukovich, can you please say why we are in Rostov now, not in Moscow, for example? And the second thing, could you please comment on the current situation in Crimea? My name is Arkady, and I represent RENT TV Moscow. So what do you think is going to happen in Crimea in the near future?
I'm here in Rostov now because a old friend of mine lives here near the city of Rostov, and I came to him to find at least some temporary refuge here for a while. As for Crimea, everything that's happening in Crimea today is a natural response to the bandits' regime change that took place in Kiev. The usurpation of power that was done by a group of radical mobsters. If you compare them to the 45 million population of Ukraine, of course. And of course, Crimeans don't want to obey and will not obey nationalists and the followers of Bandera, the Ukrainian insurgents. Of course, I sympathize what is happening today, the formation of self-defense militia units. They want to defend themselves, their families and their homes. This is a natural desire of the people. And I know that Crimeans can hear me, and I would like to address them. I urge restraint and please avoid any conflict. Crimea needs to stay part of Ukraine, of course, by maintaining a broad autonomy.
Yeah, the lady on the right. Yeah, okay, the next question will be yours. Please. Alena Shevchuk, Ukraine channel. Mr. Yanukovych, are you going to ask Russia for military assistance due to the situation in Crimea? And are you going to come back to Ukraine? When is this going to happen?
So what about the second part of the question?
When are you going to come back to Ukraine?
I believe that any military actions in this situation are unacceptable, none whatsoever, and I'm not going to request any military assistance. I believe that Ukraine needs to stay united. As for the possibility of my coming back, I will return to Ukraine once the conditions of my security and the security of my family will be ensured.
I would like the young man to speak up now. Roman Cymbaluk, Union News Agency. Mr. Yanukovych, so how did you get to Russia? Were you evacuated by Russian submarines or warships, or did you get here by plane? Did you meet President Putin? And dear colleagues, please do ask one question each. But you see, there are very few Ukrainian journalists here, so I would like to ask some more questions. So you said you are going to fight for the future of Ukraine. Do you know that all of your party fellow MPs call you a traitor? What do you think about the situation currently going on in Crimea, with all the military facilities actually blocked? Please, can you repeat the first question, or rather the first two questions that you asked? So how did you get into Russia? That's one question. Did you meet with Putin? No, that's it. That's it. Please sit down. No more questions.
So here's how I came to Russia. I came here thanks to the patriotically minded officers. That's the way I'm going to put it. They've did their duty and they helped me to stay alive. Number two, I did not meet Mr. Putin. When I ended up here in Russia, I had a phone call with him. We agreed that once I have an opportunity, once the President of Russia has an opportunity, we will meet. But I don't know when this will happen.
Please keep calm. Yeah, the lady with the mic, please. Or the young man. Nasser Hassan from Russia Today. Mr. President, the agreement that you signed no one is speaking of it today. So again, the agreement that you signed is made no mention of at all today. Don't you think that you have been deceived when you were made to sign this agreement? And how would you explain, how would you account for this division in the Party of Regions? With some of your party members criticizing you so harshly.
I did not quite get the question. Okay. Yes, I told you that I was not just deceived, I was cynically deceived, but they didn't deceive me, they deceived the Ukrainian people. And in such a situation, I would like to get a response from those who also signed this agreement. They acted as guarantors of this agreement. They ensured that this settlement agreement would be met, but we had no contacts with them. We didn't talk over the phone, and I saw no reports of any calls or desire to talk to me over the phone. No reports in the media were available. But this is not enough. We need to meet and discuss this issue. I think this issue is still on the table.
What was the second question about? How do you account for the division in the Party of Regions?
I will also reply to your question and the question in the question from the Union news agency. I'm not a judge. I'm not the one to judge them. Let God judge them. Judge their behavior in these times. Still, I do not condemn the people who were forced and whose families were forced to take the decisions. Their houses were burned, and they had to take these steps because they were threatened with weapons. I had a chance to talk to some of the MPs over the phone when I was still in Ukraine, and what I heard from them was really terrifying. So I will hope, I will pray to God that the authorities that be, quote unquote, will come to their senses, will stop the violence that is taking place in Ukraine right now.
Thank you. Oh, let's now ask somebody from the left row to ask a question. RIA Novosti. Mr. Yanukovych, how do you think Ukraine came to this pre-default situation? Why is the treasury empty, as the people who are now in power are saying? Your opponents are saying that it's because you have taken this money to the offshores. And my second question is, are you planning to take part in the presidential election in May in Ukraine? Thank you.
As for the pre-default situation, I don't think that any expert in the world will deny the fact that this situation arose when the situation got destabilized in Ukraine, and Ukraine stayed without such an important partner as Russia. We did pay the pensions and salaries regularly, and we had an intention to continue all the benefits, and the Ukrainian people are aware of that. And we worked hard to ensure that all these economic and social development programs will be implemented. Of course, we were getting ready for the 2015 election. There's no secret about that, and we would do everything in our power to convince the Ukrainian nation that it's better to live in a stable country that has a great prospect of development. And the number of our supporters was the biggest among different political parties. People believed in that, and we would have implemented that. Now the full responsibility rests with those who led our country to this crisis and to the chaos and to a disaster, full-blown disaster. They are responsible for that. They are to blame. All those who came to power today, all those who command them at Maidan Square, the both visible and the invisible forces, including the representatives of the West, the United States, who connived at the Maidan opposition forces. They bear the full responsibility before the Ukrainian people. As for the presidential election on May the 25th, I believe they are not legitimate, and I will not take part in them. Any election has to take place in compliance with the Ukrainian law and constitution.
Yeah, you can have the mic. Please introduce yourself first. Could you please speak a little bit more slowly? Rapidly, news agency, Polina Leonovich. You have already said today that the Ukrainian people betrayed you. Now you're talking about your future plans for the election. So, who are you going to rely on in your election campaign? I think you got his statement wrong. He's not going to take part in the elections. But in any case, are you going to continue to be in politics? Okay, so
what was in the first part of your question? No, I didn't get the question.
Mir TV company. Mr. Yanukovych, you said you're going to fight for the future of Ukraine, but what means are you going to use? Are you going to organize some resistance groups and lead them? Are you going to do this as a president in exile, or do you have some other methods and techniques in mind? Thank you.
Partially, I did respond to this question earlier. I'd like to reaffirm that once I have a real chance, once I have the conditions, and once my safety is ensured, including by the international mediators, Once my personal safety is ensured, I will come back to Ukraine as soon as possible. Secondly, I do see the ways of resolving this crisis. First and foremost, it's the settlement agreement that was signed and was unilaterally breached. And the West needs to take full responsibility for that. We need to come back to this issue and item by item get a reply from both sides. I believe the responsibility for not implementing this agreement rests with the West. They initiated it. They sent their foreign ministers to Kiev. They've coordinated all of these issues. They've approved all of those items that were on the agenda with the Council of Ministers that gathered in Brussels that day. That is my position. I will maintain it.
Thank you. Next question. Christiani newspaper. Mr. President, yesterday the Swiss mass media reported that the Swiss government arrested your assets in Swiss banks, as well as the assets of Alexander Yanukovich and some other members of Ukrainian ex-government. And there is also a criminal case brought against some of the former members of the Ukrainian government. And my second question, the second question will follow later. Please sit down.
I do not think that there is a single person in this audience who would take the pleasure out of what is happening in Kiev. It's the other way around, I feel. You can understand how I feel, how my supporters feel, and the people who are suffering today because of this terror, because of the lack of power and chaos that ensued. That is why, well, I have addressed, and I would like to address once again, all those who are responsible for the lawlessness that's taking place. I urge them to hand back this power again. There is still some time for us to change the direction, and change the direction with the patrons from the West.
Komsomolskaya Pravda newspaper. Mr. President, what do you think about Yulia Tymoshenko's release from prison? Have you talked to her, and how would you comment on this in general? And then you've offered your apologies to the Ukrainian people, but would you like to offer some apologies to the Berkut riot police who stood for you, stood to protect you, but now they're subjected to insults and threats?
I met with those who are members of the Berkut riot police units, and I apologize to them. These are the people who stood there without any weapons and who defended us. The protesters threw Molotov cocktails at them, shot them from arms, small arms. Some of them were killed. So I apologize to them. I'd like to apologize once again to these brave men. They were innocent. They were innocent people, and they suffered. As for Yulia Tymoshenko, I do not know what her destiny will be like, whether she's going to take part in the election or not. I believe that the Ukrainian people will respond to this question, whether she's going to have any future in the politics or not. As for the criminal case, I mean, why she was convicted. The Ukrainian court passed a verdict that legal decision was enforced, and her conditions in the penitentiary facility were exclusive. She enjoyed unprecedented conditions. She was there in quite good conditions. Her release today is an issue which has to be considered from a legal standpoint. So we need to analyze why she was released. I never meant harm for her, and I've always been vocal about that. I don't have any personal feelings, negative feelings towards her, but the agreement she signed with Russia lost about 20 billion in losses. And that was a burden for the Ukrainian people. And then the West and the President of Russia, Mr. Putin, expressed different points of view. They disagreed with my position and the position of the court, but it's up to them. That's their stance. What happened is reality. And again, the Ukrainian court responded to that question.
Echo Moscow radio station. Just a second. Oh, Dmitry Petrov, Russia 1. Dmitry, please take your seat. I would like Echo Moscow to ask their question first. Thank you for the opportunity. Mr. Yanukovych, you don't have your office now, you don't have the support from law enforcement structures, you don't even have the opportunity to go back to Ukraine. How can you confirm and prove now that you are the real and genuine and legitimate president of Ukraine?
I have facts to prove that. The laws that were passed through force and violence by the parliament will never be accepted by me. I did not sign them, and this means that these laws were not passed into action. So this is the legal proof, which means that I am the legitimate president. If the legitimate president did not resign according to the Constitution, if he's still alive, and I'm alive, as you can see, and if this president has not been impeached by the parliament, he is the legitimate president, the incumbent president. The show which we saw in the parliament with the use of force cannot be called an impeachment. I cannot accept that. I will never accept that.
What role can Russia play in this? I think all of the Russians and all of the compatriots in Ukraine are concerned over this. So what kind of role can Russia play in this conflict, in solving this? How do you see this as an acting president?
Ukraine has always been a strategic partner and will always be, due to a variety of reasons, economic factors, historical ties of Arab nations, and so on. And the agreements that we have with Russia, I mean, within the framework of these agreements, Russia has the authority to act. I believe that Russia shall act, and since I know the character of Mr. Putin, I'm surprised why he has been so restrained, why he has kept silent. This is a big question.
You're welcome. Yeah, I'm talking about you. You will share this later. Okay, so here's my question. Introduce yourself, please. I represent Russia 24 TV channel. First, mass media have been reporting that you've met with the right sector when you conducted peace talks about the Maidan protests. Do you confirm this fact? And my second question is, do you regret ever conducting any peace talks on this situation in Ukraine and in Kyiv in particular? Thank you.
We held official negotiations with the representatives of the opposition, the official representatives of the opposition. All the other negotiations that were held at a personal level with any representatives from Maidan activists, well, you know, there were a lot of them, and the goal of all of them was to end bloodshed and violence and to find a peaceful solution. There was nothing wrong about that. That was very good. But unfortunately, we were not able to find a peaceful solution. You are aware of my stance. I'd like to reaffirm that it is not acceptable for me to see any other alternatives to a peaceful solution. No power is not worth the drop of blood. And what has happened has been due to the actions of those people. I never gave any orders to the police to open fire. As you know, the police was without any weapons until the very last moment when they were under threat, when people started shooting at them. And according to the law, the police has the right to self-defense, especially when there's been massive acts of, there's been massive attacks at the police. Regrettably, I do remember the year 2004 when we had a similar situation. And my supporters, about 40,000 people came to the railway station, and the Orange Revolution supporters were on Maidan Square, and there could have been a clash and bloodshed. I went to the railway station myself and stopped the people. I prevented bloodshed then. I talked to those who brought them there. I talked to their chiefs. I said, we will never forgive, and your wives and mothers will never forgive us if there are any deaths, if the blood is spilled.
Please take your seat, I insist. Hello, Дождь TV channel. I have a question. If there is an investigation underway in The Hague, are you ready? What happens? I mean, the case to be tried in The Hague, possibly. What if this happens indeed? What will you do? And my second question is, do I get it right that Mr. Putin and the Russian government recognize you as a legitimate acting president of Ukraine?
As for The Hague, here's my point of view. First, we need to conduct an independent investigation that has to involve someone from the authorities and the opposition and from the Council of Europe. After this independent investigation, maybe we can talk about some courts. So I would like not to comment these questions. I'm very often provoked. So here's how I'm going to put it. I'm convinced that time will come and the truth will prevail, and everyone will know the truth. The truth will out one day. So what we're seeing today is a show. It's histrionics with the gunmen and the authors of that bloodshed scenario. I was more interested in averting that bloodshed. Me and my team, there was not a single person who was more interested in avoiding bloodshed than myself. But that scenario was written somewhere outside of Ukraine.
ICB channel. Unfortunately, cannot be heard.
Я вам скажу, что у меня таких разговоров с Владимиром Владимировичем Путиным было много.
A lot of conversations like that with Vladimir Putin. We were always in contact. We were always in touch, but the focus of our conversations was the economic partnership, the free trade agreement that was prepared and initialed, unfortunately, was not discussed in the parliament. It did not pass the procedures. We did not discuss it with the manufacturers, and even the examinations provided by different institutions were never seen by the president or by the prime minister. And when we saw what would be the real outcome, the real consequences of signing this agreement, and I instructed the government to have a close look at it, the decision was simple. First, we suspended those talks. We needed to find a way of how to harmonize our trade relations with the EU and our economic ties with Russia, because Russia was preparing a similar agreement with the European Union. But, this work was being done over several years and it was not finished. And there was a chance of finding a common approach, some common ground, and a wide range of items. between Russia, Ukraine, and the European Union. And we offered to have this trilateral cooperation. This was really critical because our economy would lose a lot. Our trade over with Russia exceeded $60 billion. Over the past 18 months, we lost $15 billion. And these losses could have continued. And it was hard to estimate what would be the projected losses in the near term. We realized, that in agriculture, for example, where Europe has about 30% of subsidies, our manufacturers will suffer. They will not be competitive, and our goods will not be competitive. Our agricultural goods will not be competitive. And about 15 million people who are citizens of Ukraine work in this sector. As for machine building, it did not match the EU standards. Let's take, for example, rolling stock, rail transportation. We have a different size of the track. So the CIS countries have broad track, a wide track, and in the EU they have a narrow track. And of course the defense industry, it would be left out. It would miss out on the benefits. And these losses would be the biggest for Ukraine. And we realized what we discussed with Mr. Putin, that Russia would take protective measures. It would increase the tariff rates for Ukrainian manufacturers to protect its domestic suppliers. So all of these negotiations resulted in my addressing the Ukrainian government to put the talks with the EU on hold, to renegotiate, and when we find a mutually acceptable solution, or maybe Europe could meet us halfway, or maybe Europe could provide us with economic compensation measures. Unfortunately, we didn't have the time to hold these negotiations, and the EU did not offer any steps. This work did not even begin.
I would like to say that we've been working for an hour already, and we are going to end this soon to call it a day. So if you do have any questions that have nothing to do with the issues we've already discussed, you're very welcome, so that we don't say the same things again and again. Yeah, I would like the young man who is wearing a pullover to ask his question. Yes, I would like you to introduce yourself. Reuters agency. Mr. Yanukovych, did Mr. Putin confirm that Russia considers you a legitimate acting president? And then you've said that you were surprised by Russia's reluctance to act. What kinds of actions are you expecting from Russia?
I repeat, I'm the legitimate president of Ukraine, elected by the people of Ukraine, who was elected in a free vote, free and democratic vote, and I remain the legitimate president of Ukraine. I have not had any meeting with the president of Russia, Vladimir Putin. Once I have this meeting, I will understand his attitudes, and, well, maybe we'll have some kind of discussion about the situation that is unfolding, and then I will be able to reply to your question. As for the steps that need to be taken by Russia, it would not be correct on my part to say what Russia needs to do today. But again, Russia cannot stay indifferent, cannot stay aside. It cannot be indifferent to the destiny of such a big partner as Ukraine, its neighbor, and so on. Russia needs to use all the leverage it has to prevent the chaos, the terror that is unfolding in Ukraine. It's hard for me to give any kind of tips, but I would like to add that I do not accept any attempts for an intervention to break the sovereignty and integrity of the Ukrainian territory.
Perhaps Mr. Yanukovych will say a few concluding remarks.
So Ukraine's ousted president says he still considers himself the country's legitimate leader, condemns the current authorities for unlawfully grabbing power and blames the West. With the Kiev protests turning deadly, as you can see, the conference is coming to an end right now, but you can watch it live on our website, rt.com. And to further discuss what President Yanukovych had to say, we're now joined live by political analyst Dmitry Babich. Dmitry, Yanukovych says he's going to fight for power. How is he going to do so?
Well, I think that basically Mr. Yanukovych, it was interesting what he had to say, because this is the first independent description of what happened in Ukraine during the last 2 weeks, you know, the tumultuous weeks that Ukraine went through. But I don't think he has immediate political future in Ukraine. I think everyone understands, and he himself was pretty modest in his statements. He is still, according to law, the president of Ukraine, but he understands that he is not the factual president of Ukraine.
Exactly, and hasn't the president embarrassed himself by running away from the crisis and, more importantly, from deserting his own supporters?
Well, I think that everyone understands that Mr. Yanukovych made a lot of mistakes, and his greatest mistake was not relying on his real supporters, on his real electorate from the east of Ukraine, also not trusting Russia. Instead of trusting Russia and using Russia as an intermediary, he trusted the foreign ministers of Germany, Poland and France, you know, the EU member countries, and he described during his press conference how they betrayed him, how they did not fulfill their promise. They were supposed to guarantee the agreement he signed with the opposition.
Ukraine's bracing for default now. Right, so Ukraine is bracing for default now, and the opposition claims that Yanukovych and his government are to blame. Tell us more about that. Do you think they have a point?
Well, you know that losers are always to blame for everything. Victors always say that the other guy is to blame. I think that the world has seen that the opposition is very much responsible for the destabilization that Ukraine is going through. The opposition will be responsible for the delay in Russia's loan. You know, Russia cannot give loans to countries with unstable, illegitimate governments. So I think the people of Ukraine can see who is to blame for Ukraine's destabilization. It's not Russia. It's certainly someone else. Let's not name the countries.
Yanukovych himself blames the West for fueling the unrest and violating agreements in place a week ago. But did he adhere to the conditions himself? Very briefly, Dmitry, if you can.
You know that after that agreement was signed, the Ukrainian police cleared the government headquarters, and it was at this moment that the coup actually happened. So he fulfilled his part of the agreement. He released all of the opposition activists. He declared the amnesty. He withdrew the police. And then the opposition did not fulfill a single condition that it had to fulfill. They didn't clear the government buildings. They seized power. And they started a campaign of revenge against Yanukovych. You know that Yanukovych is criticized in Russia, but I don't think he should be delivered to Kiev right now because he cannot have a fair trial in Ukraine. Russia is giving Yanukovych asylum not because he is a good man, but because he faces persecution at home.
Okay, Dmitry.
We should remember that asylums are not necessarily given to good people.
Sure, Dmitry, let's leave it there for a moment because let's now return to Rostov-on-Don and continue listening to answer President of Ukraine, Viktor Yanukovych, as the news conference is taking place right now. Let's listen in again.
And I paid my own money for that. I sold out all I had, all of my belongings at that point. And I paid $3.2 million for that house. And there's also 1.7 hectares of land, and I lived there from that moment on. The rest does not belong to me. Partially, I rented out some of the premises. Of course, I had to drive along those roads, and I rented out those premises to perform my function as head of state. It's my office. What was shown on television, these are just nice shots. You know, there are the real owners, and you will be aware of them, because the international lawyers will file lawsuits very soon, because this is not the territory, this is not in the ownership of Ukraine. As for the reports and rumors that it belonged to my son, no, this has never taken place. This is not true. I have not heard anything about that. This is a conjecture that was made up just recently. So all of the footage that you saw, that was meant to discredit me. It's a PR move, a political trick of sorts. And the rest applies to reports on foreign equity and property. I have never had any foreign property. I've never had any foreign accounts. I'm a public person. All of what I had was presented in my text statement, so this is not true.
Okay, colleagues, thank you for your questions. Let's keep cool about it. We've talked about political questions, about issues that have to do with property and even the ponies. We found out the ponies, so let's give the floor to Mr. Yanukovych.
As a conclusion, I would like to address those who claim to be the power, the incumbent power in Ukraine today. I'd like to tell them, think twice. Think twice before you make the next move. Stop this violence. You will be held responsible for that. We can now see that the end is near. The Ukrainian nation will never accept that. They will never agree to live with you in that kind of country. That is why. Here's what I'm going to tell you. Leave these posts and don't allow more violence and more grief to fall upon the Ukrainian nation. I'd like to address the Ukrainian people. First, First, I'd like to ask for an apology. I'd like to offer my apologies to all those who are suffering and who will suffer. I will do everything in my power, and I will take steps until the remaining days of my life to be with the Ukrainian nation, not with those scoundrels, not with the nationalist groups, but will stay with the Ukrainian people. I will always cherish the lives of the people which were lost. If I were in Ukraine today, I would bow to each of you. I will meet with every family, no matter who was on which side of the barricades. And I'm convinced that for those who are in power today, the Ukrainian people are nothing. They don't treat them as people. They believe these are just flotsam. But truth will out. Truth will prevail. Thank you.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Yanukovych.